Most consultants at top management consultancies like McKinsey or BCG or Bain just stay for an average of 2 to 3 years. And I also already left McKinsey after just under 2 years to move into the energy sector, even though I really enjoyed my time in consulting.
And I quit.
Homer, Mr. Burns can't see you winking.
So why is it that most consultants already leave after such a short period of time? Is that a good or bad thing? And most importantly, is management consulting in 2025 still an attractive career path? Especially if, for example, like me, you're not coming from a business or a finance background, but you may be an engineer or a scientist or from any other discipline. And that, of course, depends on a lot of personal factors. Let me start by telling you what I personally really enjoyed about my time in consulting, and then maybe that will help you as well to make the decision for you personally. The first thing that I really enjoyed about management consulting was that I've learned so much in such a short period of time as never before in my career and as never afterwards as well. And I would even go so far as to say that if you really prioritize learning, a steep learning curve, then management consulting is one of the top 3 career choices, I would say, at least in the beginning of your career. So what do I mean by that specifically? To take my example, in those almost 2 years, I was working at more than 10 multinational companies in 5 different industries and also working on a lot of different functions within those companies, from supply chain to manufacturing to product development. And you really get to see a lot of different industries and functions and also get to understand the problems that are driving the management in those big companies, because those top management consultancies typically are getting called for really important problems that are at the core of the business. And because those projects are so short and so fast paced, you really have an incredibly steep learning curve. So if you're someone that really enjoys learning, and I'm personally someone like that, then management consulting, I would say, is a very good option for you to start your career. The second thing that I really enjoyed about management consulting is that you're working with incredibly talented and driven and just overall great people. And there is a quote that says, you are pretty much the average of the 5 closest people around you. And I would say that also extends to the people you're working with, especially if you spend a lot of time with them. And that's why I think that working at top management consultancy really exposes you to great people, also challenges yourselves and really helps you grow. And it's just overall fun and exciting to sit with people in a room and just problem solve and exchange ideas and talk about challenges when you really understand that those are incredibly intelligent people, they're very driven, and it's just overall a joy to learn from them and to grow as a team together. So from a perspective of having great people, great colleagues around you, I would say management consulting is also really, really a good pathway to choose. Another thing that I personally really enjoyed, because that's something that's very, very important for me, is that I had the feeling with the project that I was working on, I was really able to make an impact, to make a difference. I don't just want to work in a job where I'm crunching numbers and I'm making some random guy a little bit more rich. For me, it's really important that what I do has an impact on society, on people around me, that actually helps them, and that it builds something that lasts, that has some purpose, right? And in the projects that I was working on, because I was mostly working on green energy, on hydrogen, on decarbonization, I really had the feeling that I was making an impact. So for example, I was working on one project where we helped one of the biggest European greenhouse gas emitters to decarbonize, to cut their CO2 emissions. So even if we're just able to, let's say, cut the emissions of that company by 10 to 20%, then that's equivalent of a person flying transatlantic for 200,000 times. So you really, if you're choosing the right projects and the right people to work with, have the opportunity to make an impact with the work that you're doing. That's something that just really inspired me, and that was really important and satisfying for me personally. And the last thing that I really enjoyed, and maybe for some people that might sound a little bit superficial, and maybe it is, but it's definitely a benefit or an upside of consulting, is that you do have a very interesting and exciting lifestyle. If you choose the right projects, it really depends a bit on also your expertise. But I, for example, was working in projects in Australia. I had projects in the US. I had projects in Mexico. I had projects in Scandinavia. So I was really traveling a lot, sometimes also for weeks at a time. And then you get to know the country, you get to know the culture. In the weekends, you can just travel around, do some excursions. And you have an overall quite interesting lifestyle, I would say. You travel in business class all the time, you stay in nice hotels, you get a company car, at least in Germany. So overall, especially if you're just coming right from university and suddenly you're earning 6 figures and you're traveling around in business class everywhere, it is definitely, I would say, a nice side effect. I wouldn't say that's the thing you focus on, for sure not, but it's definitely a nice cherry on top that you do have a quite interesting lifestyle, I would say, working at consulting. So why did I decide to leave management consulting? What are some of the drawbacks? I just mentioned that lifestyle is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? So yes, it's very exciting, it's very interesting, but it's also quite intense. I think we're all aware that at those management consultancies, at least at the top consultancies, you work very intense hours. But I think what not many people are aware is that also, at least in the starting positions, you have a quite limited impact on what your schedule is going to look like, right? Especially from Monday to Thursday. That means you're typically at the client side. So you're not in your home city. You're traveling to wherever your client is. That's mostly within that country. So for me, that was Germany, but can also be in different countries. But even if you're lucky and you get a project in your city, your schedule is very unpredictable. So that means if your client or your partner, for example, on Thursday at 8 p.m. writes you, I need this slide deck by tomorrow, I need this analysis, then that means that Thursday night you're going to sit there and finish that slide deck or that analysis. And that could mean finishing at midnight, finishing at 1 a.m., finishing at 2 a.m. So it's not just that you have a very intense working life, I would say. So 70, 80 hours could actually happen on a quite regular basis. It's also that you have a very limited control over your actual schedule in deciding on when you want to work. So it's very difficult to, for example, say, oh, Wednesday night I want to grab a beer with my friends at 9 p.m. It can work, right? So there's a lot of projects and partners that really try to focus on making it happen for their associates or for their fellows, but you can't really bet on it. Now, I oftentimes had the case where something suddenly came in and I had to work very late nights. So yes, the weekend you have to yourself, but pretty much your social life when you're working at those top management consultancies is restricted to Friday to Sunday. And you just have to be aware of that. And for me personally, I didn't mind the long working hours. I just like to work in general. The 70, 80 hours was not really a problem for me. What I didn't like so much was that I had very limited control over when I want to work, and that I couldn't just really say, oh, okay, so this evening I'm going to reserve and I'm going to do X, Y, Z. It can work in some projects. It depends also a little bit on the sector that you're working with, the people that you're working with. So for example, if you're working on public sector projects, they're a lot less intensive than, for example, banking or M&A projects, right? Or for example, if you work in locations in the Scandinavians, so for example, Sweden or Norway, their working hours are a lot easier going than, for example, in Italy or Spain. So you do have some level of control, but overall, I would say that the work is very intense, and that personally for me was fine. But you also have, especially in the starting positions of associates, fellow, senior associate, you have, I would say, rather limited impact on when you work and when you want to do some free time activities. The second, and I would say for me personally, the most important reason why I decided to leave management consulting was that in management consulting, you get to see a lot of different projects in a very short period of time. Especially at the top consultancies, projects typically last in the range of a couple of weeks, maybe a few months, right? So you go into a project, but you don't really understand in the end, especially if you're in a more junior position and you're not really staying in touch with the clients, you don't really understand, did the client implement what you suggested? And if he did, was it successful? Sometimes you hear it from the partner, or you read about it in the news. That can then be very satisfying that you hear, for example, that advice got implemented and it really worked, right? But a lot of the times you're not really seeing a project from the beginning to the end. You're coming in at some point and you're leaving before it's actually implemented by the client. And that can be fine for many people. And I would say even for me, it was a great experience to really get a very large amount and variety of different projects and not just work on one project alone. But then I also wanted to have the contrast on experiencing how it is to work on a project from the beginning all the way to the end. Really take responsibility from how you build up the project and then also the execution, and then take ownership of whether it works or not. And that's really something that's very hardly possible in management consulting. That was one of the main drivers why I moved into the industry and decided to leave management consulting. And I wouldn't even say that maybe at some point in time I might not go back to management consulting, because as I said, I really also enjoyed the fast pace, but at least I wanted to have that experience where I'm working for a couple of years on something all the way from the start to the finish line. And the third reason why I decided to leave management consulting is a bit connected to that. That is that I had the feeling that a lot of the times I'm advising people who really do exciting and great things, and I'm a little bit more sitting in the passenger seat giving advice, giving tips, and that can be very helpful, very impactful. But I'm personally just someone who wants to be in the driver's seat, who wants to get their hands dirty, who wants to actually do something themselves. Especially because I was mostly advising on projects in the green hydrogen space. And that's an industry that's in a very, very interesting and dynamic phase. And I thought, if at some point I'm going to leave, then this is the right time to really get involved into the early phase of this industry and really help shape that industry and get involved and not just advise from the sidelines. So that's a bit of a personality question. What kind of personality type are you? Are you someone that is happy with looking at a lot of different things and just advising? Or are you someone that really wants to dive into it and be in the driver's seat themselves? And then it depends on whether consulting would be a good career for you, or maybe it's just like in my case, something that you do for 2 or 3 years. You get to know a lot of different projects, but then you decide, well, it was great, but now I want to really do something myself. And that can also be an option, right? So now I already partly answered our last question. Would I recommend people to go into management consulting in the beginning of their career, or would I personally do it myself again if I had the choice again, right? And for me, the answer is a clear yes. Simply because I learned so much in such a short period of time that is still useful for me today. So I really learned about how to make good presentations, not just visually, but also how to communicate well, how to communicate top down, how to really manage different stakeholders that are involved in a project. And those are experiences that I would have never been able to make if I would have transitioned into industry directly. I would have never had that strong mentorship that I've got at management consulting, and also that steep learning curve. And that really helped me to also very quickly gain more responsibility at my current role in the energy industry, right? So overall, I would say it was definitely very helpful for my professional development, and I would anytime do it again. So again, if you're someone that really prioritizes learning and that wants to actually build a sustainable career, and that wants to get a breadth of different topics and functions and problems to solve, then I would definitely recommend you even today that that's a great opportunity as a career starter. Whether you stay there or whether you decide to then move somewhere else, that's a totally different discussion. But as a career starter, I would say it's definitely a very interesting and worthwhile experience. But, so there's always a but, there's one thing I want to raise that I would say is an exception. If you are, for example, an engineer or scientist or a medical doctor or someone that's actually very focused on a specific topic, and you already know that you want to work on that topic for at least the majority of your career. So for example, you are a chemist and you know, I really love organic chemistry. I want to work on organic chemistry for the next 20 years. Then there's really no point in going into management consulting. Actually, it would even hurt your career, because if you go into management consulting and then you transition into the industry, you're probably going to end up in some form of generalist or management position, right? You're going to deal with topics that are not necessarily fully related to the work that you are prepared for when you study chemistry or chemical engineering. There can be some exceptions. So my role, for example, right now is still very technical, but I would say one that is quite the exception. So most people that go into management consulting and then transition into industry, they take on, depending on their seniority, some management position where they are mostly dealing with processes, project management, and not really that much with the actual subject that they're studied for. So that is one thing I would raise a but. If you already know you're really focused on, for example, chemistry, physics, chemical engineering, and you want to be an expert in that field, then I would recommend you to either go into an industry or company where they focus on that specific topic, or maybe even stay in academia. But in that specific case, management consulting is not really the recommended pathway. But that's a whole different discussion on whether consulting is right for which profession, and also how to make a good exit from consulting. So if that's something that you find interesting, just let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to make an extra video just on that topic. For today, that's it. Thanks for watching, and cheers. See you in the next video.